So we ended the last video here with an overview of how you might engage the world of the text. In this video, we're going to get some practice sort of moving our way into engaging the world of the text. At the end of the last video, I indicated that starting by identifying the literary context is where I would suggest you start when you engage the world of the text on a particular passage, and then you move into more detailed analysis of different things like words, the grammar, intertext, these kinds of things. And we're going to get practice doing some of that individual analysis as well. But what we're going to start with is identifying the literary context. So you can think of this video sort of as an extended lecture pause where we're going to practice engaging the world of the text together. So I'm going to ask you to do some engagement, pause the video, do your engagement, and then I'll step in and do sort of my engagement and show you how I have done these different kinds of things. So with respect to identifying the literary context, we're going to go ahead and jump in with probably the most famous verse in the Gospel of John, and perhaps the most famous verse in the entire New Testament, if not the entire Bible, John 3:16. And we're going to get a little bit more context. We're going to do sort of an entire passage that one might choose to do exegesis on. So this is a passage of 5 verses, which might be a little bit short if you were to write an exegesis paper on it. We might extend the passage a little bit more, but for our purposes, it will work to be able to briefly do this exercise. So what I want you to do here is stop and grab a physical or electronic Bible, pull up John chapter 2 and 3 and 4, and summarize what comes before, summarize what comes after, and then state how John 3:16 through 21 fits into this context. So each one of these should probably be about 2 sentences or so, summarizing the previous context, summarizing the following context, and then fitting John 3:16 through 21 sort of as a puzzle piece in between what comes before and what comes after. So go ahead and do that, and once you come back, I will show you how I have done this. All right, so my own summary of the different contexts. And I'm going to read out the statements that I have come up with. So you can think of me sort of as having done this lecture pause myself. And these are the kinds of things one might identify, or how one might state these elements of the context within an exegetical paper or while doing this kind of analysis in sermon preparation. So as far as the previous context goes, I have said this. At the end of John chapter 2, Jesus is in Jerusalem for Passover. So notice I've identified the setting of where John is and the time, which might be significant for what's going on in the narrative. He clears the temple and predicts his death and resurrection by means of the temple's destruction. So the temple's destruction and rebuilding is sort of a cipher for Jesus's own death and resurrection. While still in Jerusalem at the beginning of John chapter 3, so we're still not into our particular passage yet, Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night and asks him about the nature of Jesus's identity, and the signs that Jesus is performing. So notice the time in which, again, the setting of the narrative is important. Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night, which is going to be significant later on. Jesus tells Nicodemus that he must be born from above, or born again, to experience the kingdom, and he continues to explain to Nicodemus the nature of that is, Jesus's identity. So that's what comes before, and what comes after John 3:16 through 21 is Jesus and his disciples leave Jerusalem. So we have a change in setting. They go to the Judean countryside where Jesus baptizes near the place that John the Baptist is baptizing. And this leads John to clearly state that he himself is not the Messiah and proclaim the priority of the Son, proclaim the sort of priority of Jesus, that Jesus is above John, and that Jesus is the one from above. So we have this sort of connection back to John chapter 3 with the Son being the one from above. In the following context, we get a really sort of clear shift in the setting, which indicates to us that we are moving away into something else, even though there are connections back to what came before. So then how John 3:16 through 21 fits into this context. John 3:16 through 21 concludes Jesus' interaction with Nicodemus. So the interaction begins before, and then what comes after, we move into a new setting. Nicodemus is no longer a character in the passage as it moves into chapter 4. And presents the mechanism by which one might be born from above. So in John 3:16 through 21, Jesus is really sort of laying out how one might be born from above or born again, which is sort of the subject of the object of Nicodemus's question. And the way that one is born from above is by belief in the Son who descended from above. So there's this sort of connection of Jesus coming from above, descending down, that allows the audience to be born from above and allows Nicodemus to be born from above. And so the passage indicates that belief brings one into the light. And notice how we have sort of two very Johannine themes, belief and light, tied together here in this passage. And it tacitly, so not explicitly, sort of the invitation is under the surface in a way. It tacitly invites both Nicodemus, who comes to Jesus at night, so remember the setting at night, it invites Nicodemus to move into the light, and it also invites the audience to move into the light. So one of the sort of main purposes of the Gospel of John is to invite the audience to belief, either continued belief or a starting belief. So John 3:16 through 21 sort of really serves to conclude what's going on with Nicodemus, and then the passage is going to shift in the following context to a new setting in which we hear sort of ringings of what came before, but we really get into new content in what follows. So John 3:16 through 21 is really sort of a concluding part of a larger section here. All right, so that's how we might start to engage the world of the text, by jumping in with the literary context, thinking about our particular passage within what comes before and what comes after, and putting it in its place, as it were, before moving in to do some detailed analysis. And that's what we're going to do here in our time that remains together, is do some detailed analysis together. So what I want to do is return us to our same passage and do a sort of abbreviated literary close reading. So what I want you to do is pause the lecture and again read the text. And this time, look for things that are repeated. So identify at least two commonly repeated words in the passage. You, of course, can do more if you find more. And identify two dualisms, that is to say, two sort of opposites. And this is something that John does very often, is to set up two sort of opposites or dichotomies or dualisms, where they're sort of they're presented as if there is nothing between them. It's either this or that. So two commonly repeated words, two dualisms. Go ahead and pause. When you come back on, I will show you the ones that I came up with. All right. So my first repeated word is world here. Cosmos in the Greek occurs 4 different times. This is another Johannine sort of theme that we see the world. And there's also sort of this interesting thing in John with respect to the world, where the world is can be a good thing, but is also often portrayed as a bad thing. So we sort of have this dualism with respect to the world, that it's either good or it's bad, and there's sort of no middle ground. There's no moderation when it comes to the world and the Gospel of John. So we see the world showing up often in this passage, and the same thing with sun. The sun is repeated 3 different times. So these are the 2 repetitions that stood out to me. You may have found some other ones. There are other ones in here. Love and belief. Evil shows up a couple of different times. And then as to our dualism, some of the ones that I noticed was love and hate, perishing and eternal. So this idea of sort of what sort of goes away, what is earthly or fleshly and perishes, and then what is eternal, which is connected to another one of these dualisms, belief and unbelief. and condemned and saved shows up, and darkness and light. This is perhaps one of John's favorite dualisms throughout the entirety of the gospel. Contrasting darkness and light. And again, remember the setting of this particular passage is Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. So not only do we have the darkness and the light in the sort of theme of the passage or in the content of the passage, but also in the overarching setting of the passage. So this is all to serve as a way for you to start getting into the world of the text, both at the sort of meta level, identifying the literary context, and then identifying particular words. You'll be doing more of this as the semester progresses, practicing on different passages from the Gospel of John and practicing on a passage that you are perhaps working on throughout the entire course of the semester, really starting to notice things about at the micro level of the passage, really getting into the details of the text. And the next step here would be to explain why these repetitions are important, why these dualisms are important, and how they function within the passage, and how that connects to the larger context of the entirety of the Gospel of John.